Good luck. But the thing of it is
Okay,
if
we're on.
it's not, if they haven't been sent.
Oh, no, they were sent, I was there then.
Okay.
I just don't want to go down to my cellar. Yeah. No, that's the period that I was just curious.
Okay, it's 5 o'clock. We need to call the meeting to order. Tuesday, July 12th, 2022, meeting of the Bylaw Charter Review Committee. Is there any public comment? Noreen.
Thank you. Noreen Dorn. I have a question, but I don't know if it's better to come up now or under your old business, under your continual review of the charter. I would prefer it to come up then, because then we could have a back and forth.
Okay.
Other than public comment.
All right.
It's a charter question that came up last year.
Okay, well, the timing is yours then.
All right.
Okay. Annual reorganization. Under the charter, we do this the first meeting in July. We have an opening for chairman.
I nominate Sandra
Second.
Hall.
Thanks, guys. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that Sandra Hall is chairman of the Bylaw Charter Review Committee. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All unanimous. All right, we need a vice chairman.
I nominate Carol Thayer for the vice chairman.
Second?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Moved and seconded that Carol Thayer is vice chairman. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And clerk.
I nominate Deb Samantha as clerk.
Second.
Deb Samantha has been nominated as clerk. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. We have a slate. Thank you. Approval of minutes for June 14th. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes, June 14th.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
It is a vote. So, moving on, we have new business, discussion with Joe Powers, who is hiding behind a chair. I can't see him. You're going to come up a little closer, Joe, or are you afraid?
And I'm hoping my laptop will work
Oh,
so I can access the charter in real time.
okay. We have your, this is Joe's timeline for this year's town meeting.
Hot off the press?
Hot off the press.
Hot off the press.
Maureen, would you like a copy?
I have
You
it
have it.
in a greater font.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, that would be good.
Yeah, I have to find something to ask.
So how does this all fit, and how is it better?
I'm sorry, who said better?
I said better.
All right, I never claimed that, so.
I'm asking.
If you're looking at, I'm assuming you derived from the selectmen's packet?
Yes,
Is that correct? Thank you.
yes.
Excuse me. First, the document you're looking at, you'll notice has target date and if there's any relevant governance. So as I had indicated to the board last night and hearing from citizens and board members and having the desire myself, the goal is to accomplish just about everything related to the, excuse me, the preparation of town meeting, well in advance of town meeting, obviously honoring the charter as necessary, but what you see here for these key dates, every one of these dates is earlier than the charter requirement dates. For your purposes and for the benefit of your watching audience, you can see that there are 4 columns. First, of course, we're working for the annual town meeting, which is to be held Monday, May 1st, 2023. And that date, as you folks know better than most, ties back to the charter, specifically Chapter 2, which governs town meeting, 2-3-1. Then below that you have an action item, the number of days prior to town meeting, the target date, and then the governance that requires it, if applicable. As I had indicated to the board last night, first, I believe it, well, let me do it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the first 6 items you see there are all not applicable to governance. That is to say, it's not required not required by the charter, bylaws, or perhaps statute but rather these are essential and necessary. And these 6 steps, I've used the header department head, but I will be releasing this to department heads and committee chairs for anyone that corresponds to it. And what it is, first, is I'll be meeting with department heads on Thursday, July 14th, to go over the calendar that you see in front of you. So that's the first of the 6 items listed there. The remaining items talk about a follow-up department head meeting in August, and then the remaining 4 items are the real action items, which are all tentatively due to me by department heads, and again, it would also be committee chairs, if appropriate, for preliminary information, and I want to underscore the word preliminary. And what that gets to is operating budget requests, capital item requests, notice of community preservation requests, and I say notice because I am not a governing body, I am not a public body, and that is a separate and distinct purview of community preservation. However, as a person who formulates the warrant and coordinates the Board of Selectmen reviewing those, I thought it appropriate for at least department heads to provide a list of the applications they expect to submit by the CPC's deadline. And then last but not least, I'm asking for what I call notice of proposed warrant articles. So operating budget, capital budget, to lesser degree community preservation, but certainly warrant articles. All of those are items that I need to be aware of if you travel down on the list there, for me then to provide the board with a, quote, current financial assessment. Now the charter, as you folks may recall, talks about that being required of me to provide to the board in early October, and then the board is similarly required in early October to turn that into a budget policy for me to turn back out to budget owners. So you can see there, I'm targeting September 19th, which is a Monday, and I'm targeting that date for several reasons. First, you will have heard at the board meeting on July 11th that the town is contemplating a special town meeting. I think I made reference to that at your last meeting, but we are looking at a special town meeting at the end of September of 2022. And so I wanted the annual town meeting assessment to be something I provide the board prior to that, so that's where you come up with the September 19th date. And then as you go through the rest of it, these are all standard items, if you will, or standard key actions, the vast majority of which are regulated by the charter, one of which is dictated by community preservation, one of which is customary, and that's what I've learned to know. I've heard it called the Saturday round robin, the omnibus meeting, but it's that lovely, usually first Saturday in March, where we cram ourselves into a room, and to this day, and for the rest of my life, I will say, how were we not a super spreader event prior to COVID? The last time we did that, which was March 7th of 2020. So we're looking to resume that, and what I see for criticality of that is the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee meeting jointly to hear from department heads, and then if there are certain key committees, it's a chance for both boards to meet in an all-day effort, televised, to get that information out. Because right after that, you'll see it's the only blank spot under governance, and so it is not that it is not governed by the charter. It is, but what it is the charter makes reference to the fact that the Finance Committee must hold a public hearing and also meet severally and jointly with the Board of Selectmen. So one of the key items I think that the Board of Selectmen took from my presentation of this is we are looking for Saturday, March 4th, 2023 to be that all-day event to really dive into the proposed operating budget at that time. For the Finance Committee, if they agree with that structure and schedule, to then use that to perhaps have a public hearing for the benefit of the public at a regular meeting of theirs the following week. And then as you can see, the rest of it then ties to getting explanations and prospective motions and all of that together, so that when the warrant gets published for 2023, it is as encompassing as possible. And that means I'm looking to relinquish a little ditty that I created here for Harwich that I'm very happy to sacrifice, and that was the motions book. I really want the warrant to be able to serve as a motions book and warrant at the same time. So that was my brief introduction of the proposed calendar today.
Well, it's interesting. Sounds like it will be a little less scrunched up than it has been the past
That
couple
is
of years.
absolutely the goal.
Yeah,
Just-
that's,
Just as an exercise, because I was curious, I went back to the original charter to see what the, what it's, I started just to look at what it said about when town meeting was to be held. And the original charter said the first week in May,
The first week.
the first week. Right here, you must have a copy somewhere, do you not?
I look in the direction of the retired town clerk, tell me if I have a copy somewhere.
Oh, well,
Yes, they're,
So I just
The
went,
ta-
I
the
just went
town
through
clerk has
and pulled out the way that charter was written, as far as all the lead up to town meeting was concerned, and what it would have been like if we had had those dates
Let me
in
give a
force
copy to
this
Joe.
year. And don't yell at me if it's not 100% accurate, because, yeah. All I know is that for many years, this timeline worked really well. And how it differs, I didn't get as far as how it differs from what's in there now, because I ran out of time, but I just thought it was sort of an interesting exercise, for whatever it's worth. But I wonder why, and Anita has explained this to me, why it was changed from the first week in May to just the first Monday, because the flexibility is, I think, at this point, something that people are looking for. Am I correct?
Sorry, I thought that was a question to the clerk. I was.
I have the question to you.
Sorry, could you restate?
I said there seems to be an interest in having more flexibility in setting the town meeting date, as there was then. So it's not unprecedented, because that's where we started.
Sure.
And Anita explained to me why it changed, and you can ask her to explain why it changed.
okay.
'Cause I wasn't involved much at that point.
No, you weren't. One of the selectmen at that point in time, what was happening was that our town elections were held on Monday, and Tuesday started the town meeting. So one of our former selectmen came to me and asked me what I thought of having the first week in May be our town meeting, and then having the election the third Tuesday, which follows all the state. So that way people get used to voting on Tuesdays as opposed to, and he also felt that it was unfair for someone to be elected on Monday and have to get sworn into the positions on Tuesday,
Right.
not knowing,
That
Yeah,
is
that-
100% true.
right.
yeah, that, I remember that being a big one.
And that being said, that was the impetus to try to start the
Right.
change for this. I don't remember if it went to the first week, but I know that that's what our moderator had always.
Well, I think it's specified as
specifies
Monday
Monday.
in this charter.
Correct, so maybe, I don't remember if it had specified Monday, I don't remember that point.
We'd have
I
to
don't
go through
remember
all
that.
the
We'd have to
changes,
go
but
through the changes, but it would have been the first change that happened,
But changing it back to the first week,
week.
I think, makes a lot of sense. I mean, there do seem to be people who would like to do a full day on Saturday, and you really can't tinker with it much under normal conditions, the way you could under the COVID.
Correct.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When it had that language, did the day of the week change? In other words, could the town contemplate, say, in one year, they would have had a town meeting on a Monday because it worked on the calendar, but in another year, they might have had it on a Wednesday? Or did they steer towards a certain day of the week?
They steered towards
They
Mondays
did, okay.
because of the fact that the elections were held on Monday. So people were used to, at that point, in coming out, voting on Monday, and then your town meeting started Tuesday. So that's probably why they felt that having the town meeting start on Monday would continue through the 3 days together, and then having the election 3 weeks later on a Tuesday.
Yeah. The 87 version did not specify a day.
Right.
This said, shall meet regularly in the, and then it went on to talk about a fall town meeting.
Really?
Well, there was the original plan was there was a fall town meeting every year.
Special, right?
Well, the fall town meeting was to try to cut down on the size of the meetings and the length of time it took, and maybe to encourage attendance. The May town meeting would be geared more towards budget and financial, and the fall town meeting, planning and zoning. Not that they could be mutually exclusive, you could do either or, but that it was just felt that it would be good to focus on budget, keep it short, and in the fall do the other. And after some years, it was decided that it was not satisfactory, not working. I don't remember the reasons why it was taken out, but that was the plan.
So you've handed me a distraction, and I'm taking the distraction. Just focusing on things like originally, and I think the charter now speaks to the capital outlay plan must be presented by capital outlay to the board of selectmen and FinCom meeting jointly in December. And originally it was a date certain, and a date certain I think is the way to go.
Again, there was a period of time when there was a lot of tinkering going on with this, and I don't think it was to the benefit of the charter or the procedures that a lot of these things were done, and
Yeah.
why they were done, I don't know. But my thought is that we could probably go back to the original language, at least in greater part, and redo it. Because it worked.
Sure.
That's it for me. I think, would you, this is the same question I think I asked last time. Is there any potential for bringing some of these changes forward for the fall? So we can have a vote on them in the spring?
So my answer remains the same as previously, meaning I'm not yet inclined to provide prospective articles other than, I think there's 5 that we're presently aware of.
Mhm.
Having said that, if you watch the board's meeting on July 11th, you'll know that on their meeting on July 25th, I'll be coming back with prospective articles that are the items that we know must come before town meeting in September, and that relates to potentially still, because we haven't heard word yet, that the regional agreement is actually in effect, but if the regional agreement is in effect, we need to have a financial article to deal with the surplus that's created. You may have heard at the board's meeting on June 27th from the water wastewater superintendent that although we weren't sharp, we're still reeling from the directive that we expect to come from the Department of Environmental Protection relative to wastewater efforts. And so I know that...
Everybody aware of this? Mm-hmm. Okay.
I know that Dan Pelletier and I are working with Russ Kleekamp, who is the vendor from GHD Engineering, and there are a few articles that we anticipate to have come before the September town meeting so that we can stay ahead of the process, that we're still, mercifully, still in the forefront and still not having to react really to anything. But beyond that, I'll be able to gauge on July 25th what the board's appetite is for how many more articles and how they want to handle that.
So you will put the question to them
I think they'll put the question to me.
on the
That's what
articles,
I'd say,
on these,
correct.
on this?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, because I think it's worth the doing if they're open to it.
Right.
Okay. Noreen?
Yeah, just one question, and it's a little off track, but not way off. The easements always have to go through town meeting. Is there any other process, like the Board of Selectmen or joint Board of Selectmen and FinCon that can approve an easement? The reason I ask is that's one of the definite needs for a fall town meeting. And I was just curious if it had to go that way. The easements would, in this case, would be for the pump stations for the next stage. So they need to be done in advance so that you can show the SRF people and, you know, the whole progression of things. But I just didn't know, I never thought about it, if there was any other, I mean, we buy properties without town meeting. I love things to go before town meeting.
We don't buy properties without going through town meeting.
We don't, no. Oh, that's right, the authorization is done then, and then it happens afterwards.
Right.
But at any rate.
I wouldn't think there would be any other way but going through town
Yeah.
meetings, because an
No, I
easement is
didn't-
sort of a taking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, an
Sure,
easement.
my response would be, and this goes back to various municipal government roles I've had, that when you think of town meeting, you think of the legislative authority to enact laws, to appropriate money, and to take land. And so generally speaking, I think the Commonwealth defaults to, if there is a taking, which an easement would be, it is the purview of the legislature rather than the executive. Or at the very least, the legislature may empower the executive, but it would still require town meeting action.
That's right, yeah. No, I know, we just did a taking, and now that I'm thinking back, that was actually approved in a May 19. Yeah, I'm just trying to avoid a fall town meeting, but,
I don't think we can avoid a fall town
I don't
meeting.
think so. Just a
Doesn't
thought.
look that way.
Well, I know that, working with our former finance director, Carol Capola, she had ingrained in me, and I'm not gonna miss the opportunity to say that we have Anne Marie Ellis joining us later this week
Mhm.
as our new finance director, but we are mindful that there's close to a $750,000 surplus, so-called, that would occur once the Department of Early and Secondary Education, or DESE, says that the Monomoy agreement is in effect. And I know Dr. Carpenter was hoping that it would be in effect within the first quarter of the fiscal year. We need to deal with that surplus. So we, in my opinion, needs to be more than the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator, and it needs to be a legislative action because it's a significant surplus. And so, working with the former finance director and partnering with the new finance director, we're of a mindset that a surplus of that nature requires town meeting action. So for no other reason, we want to have that adjudicated so that the board can then go back to their somewhat regular schedule in either October or more likely November of establishing the tax rate for the rest of the fiscal year. So if for no other reason, we're contemplating there has to be a meeting for that, but I know the superintendent, wastewater superintendent, is keen to have some actions taken so that we can stay ahead of that process of SRF and DEP and what have you.
Okay. But it just is a question of all hangs on the Department of Education's
So Dan's
approval.
presentation to, the water wastewater superintendent's presentation and follow-up by Russ Kleekamp, the engineering consultant, is that given what we've been modeling and preparing for, that ties back to the DEP directive on wastewater and accelerating that, we ought not to let that time frame pass.
Okay. Any questions? Anything else we need to talk about? I think we're sort of on the same page on this one.
Yes, I don't like to answer open-ended questions that are so loaded. My answer would be short. Do you have 2 weeks? I can tell you what's on my mind.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd rather yield at this point and say thank you for the time so far, and I look forward to ongoing conversations with you
Well, I
folks.
have a feeling we will be having many more.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yes.
And we should, if there's anything else that anybody else wants to discuss
No,
under
I
the last item, I think we're making some progress. Sounds like, anyway.
Definitely.
Anything else maybe coming from the Board of Selectmen that we should be aware of, that we're not?
So, based on my calendar, I'm gonna be relying upon the board's meetings this summer for them to direct me. Is administration gonna be taking the lead on any prospective warrant articles that would impact upon bylaw, charter, and things like that?
Okay.
And as you know, if I'm using August 31st as the preliminary deadline, we still have the statutory deadlines through the charter that are in middle of February for petitioned articles. So I know that there'll be discussion of articles throughout the fall.
Okay, so you're going to be talking to the selectmen in late July about the town meeting,
Special town meeting.
special town meeting. Would you be available for an August meeting with us if there appears to be some movement in that direction?
So generally speaking, the answer is yes. I would not like to reveal what my vacation plans may be on
I
television.
just had a vacation.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful for that.
What a job.
So I am as deft and skilled at carrying over and using as necessary. Remember that the children have that gap period of they're still on vacation and they're on a lot of programs, so.
Yeah.
It's a Danny's staycation. more than-
If I pick a date, would you say yes or no as
I
far
can
as,
certainly try to do
how
that.
about August 10th?
I think that is within the realm of possibility.
Okay, is that good for everyone? I know Deb said she's available
I
totally
hate
through
to use
August.
a bad word, but I would assume that's a Tuesday.
August 10th,
It's a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday.
No, it's a Wednesday, August 9th, sorry. That's a Tuesday.
August
There's
10th, well,
Some symmetry in the
Isn't it?
8, 9
10th
days.
is, 10th is
Ninth-
Wednesday.
No, 9th is Tuesday.
Ninth?
I
Oh, okay.
misspoke again. Sue me.
Yeah, works for me.
Okay, Anita?
Okay.
All right, so we'll do 5 PM here, and somewhere between then and there, now I need to get a key. So, anybody else have anything? Take a motion to adjourn?
Excuse me.
Under,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Sorry.
Noreen.
she
No,
needed
I'm
something
waiting
under,
for
Oh.
old business.
old business.
Oh, it's this old this is old business and you're up. Okay. You want to come up a
Thank
little
you, Joe.
closer? We'll have a,
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, Joe.
Bye, Joe.
Can I remain?
Oh, okay.
So, well, I think you'll be interested in this topic. I have a feeling. My question is, there was a certain issue that came up during the lead up to town meeting this past year. And it is the process that we use for hiring either newly created people or adding to our roster more of the same type of person.
Mhm.
And I know that we all could list many, many, many different examples of how it's been done. And I will agree, as was said at a Board of Selectmen meeting during March, that it's been done different ways. Reading the words, that's why I was asking about the Finance Committee minutes, Anita, because I can't get at the minutes from the situations that I remember. I know you ladies probably remember a lot more before my time. So I was trying to decide, and I still haven't, so I bring it to you, what's the best way to approach this topic? During the dispute last March, at one point, the chairman said, you know, well, at some point, we're gonna get a policy on how we do this. So my question is, should it be a charter issue where we spend a lot of time, and I approach you people to take it on, to find out, you know, what the charter said and what it really should be? We know there's that one sentence about funding, that a lot has been read into. Or should it possibly be something that a citizen would approach the Board of Selectmen, and I could write to have it put on an agenda, as was promised last March, that it would be settled by next town meeting, that a policy would be done. So I just kind of wanted to pick this committee's brain on how I might proceed if I was, I just don't want to go through another year of arguing about that again.
There was a lot of back and forth, and what I can tell you is, going back again to original intent, was that any new hires would be put before town meeting in an article. It is the way it operated for many years. It had nothing to do with overrides. It was the fact that this was it was meant to be transparent to the town that we are taking on more staff, and do they wish to do that. It was never intended that these should be buried in the budget. So what I would suggest is a clarifying line in the charter to specify exactly that.
I agree, that line is, I mean, for one line to shape that is an awful lot, you know, I mean, everything doesn't get approved until it's funded.
Hindsight is 20/20.
Right.
We understood what we meant.
What it meant,
The
yeah.
boards of selectmen understood what was meant. The finance committee understood what was meant. Again, something's been lost over the years in interpretation. And I can see where it could be. because it isn't clear.
But my experience started in the May of 2011. I was the one who pulled out that sample for the original Sean Libby job. And that was an override. I can't remember. That's why I was wondering why it was an override, you know, but I know the intent. The discussions were not about it being an override. The discussions were about
Right.
the job.
Right.
We had just gone through the 2009 crash. We had years of people not getting raises. This was the first job that was going to be created new in a long time, you know. And my other concern, which is a little different, but I had the previous finance director do a report way back in 16. And without tracking this through articles or something else, I have a report that was from Carol when she first came on that shows the number of part-time and full-time jobs that were created between 2013 and 2016. And it would shock everybody. And it's not that I'm against employees.
And we've added a car for each and every one.
That's true.
But, so, I'm kind of thinking that the way to go towards this would be to decide what we want to do, you know. For instance, one comment when this issue came up many times in the spring was somebody said, you know, well, you'd have to do that for part-time people as well. I have no problem with that. I mean, I actually look at every newly created or added to roster position as being like an override. I mean, you start paying for it then, and you're gonna be paying for it every year after that.
That was
So-
something that Finance Committee, during my tenure, we determined that any new hires should go to an override, because we had the budget cap that we had to deal with. I mean, we had the Prop 2.5, we had all of that, and under that constraint,
Yeah.
to have new hires, you had to go above that 2.5.
And that's how.
So that's how the override came.
2011, okay?
That goes back to, as I say, my tenure on the Finance
know.
Committee.
And also, though, I remember, and I can't remember if it's 2016, 2017, but there was a situation where I was actually in between committees for like 2 months. So I got to sit in the audience, and that was the year that the 4 firemen were added on, and they were in the budget, no article. And the shocking part was that they weren't added, they weren't in the budget presentation. So unless people were, you know, followed things regularly, those 400 people had no idea they were in a number that size. And sadly, I was talking to a friend, and you know, usually somebody gets up at every town meeting and says, are there any new positions in this budget? That year, nobody did. And all of a sudden, the budget passed, and I said, I don't believe we just passed a budget with 4 new positions, and only a small percentage of the town realized that. Nothing to do with being against firemen again. I know you.
But that was exactly the purpose and the intent of the original
That's right.
specification, was so that people don't typically go into the budget. There are very few people in this community, or any community, that are nerdy enough to sit down and try to figure out what that budget says.
I know, that's
And
true.
even if you are nerdy enough, if you don't have the detail, which a lot of us don't
Right.
bother with, I mean, how are you gonna tell with departments that big, whether there were, you know, a 40-year worker was replaced by a brand new, I mean, there are so many things that can happen with 70 people that, you know, it's impossible.
And there are certain departments that will probably get from the voters whatever they ask for, that being one of them.
Right.
So why not make it open and clear?
So that was that's what's been.
Great, we've talked about this before.
I'm sure you
Yeah.
have, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't know what the best way, you know, to go about it is.
Well, we can possibly take it on as a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. We could maybe find some common ground with our town administrator on this. I don't know whether he agrees with it or not. He's hiding again.
Permission to approach the bench.
Absolutely.
And if I heard you correctly, Madam Chair, I think you said you would like to know what the town administrator thinks. And not to be cute, I will tell you that I often say that I don't think. I administer and I manage. Meaning, as a former member of this august body a few years back, or more than a few, but I have a number of thoughts about the process that you've talked about, the history, the proceedings. As a quick side note, this is why I hung around, because I can learn more from you talking in 5 minutes than I can educate anybody in 2 hours. Especially where, you know, I only washed ashore in this fair town, let me do the math, 7 years ago this month. So, you know, my knowledge, my historical knowledge is limited. I try to read as many books as I can, including the town reports, but they only go so far. I'm waiting for the movie. I'm keenly interested in how the town and the governance deals with personnel and administration of personnel. And for me, it strikes me that Chapter 4 talks all about the role that I have, town administrator. And Chapter 5 talks all about the role that I have, administrative organization. And that's not lost on me, that there are 2 chapters that the role that I possess really has to weigh in on. And I think the reference that you're talking about, Noreen, appears in Chapter 4 under the administrator,
Right.
if I remember correctly. So for me, I'm never going to say what I think as a person and even as an administrator. Rather, I would work through the board to respond to these issues. I think what you've presented in what I consider to be the first proper format, and that's before the board that is charged with analyzing all of our governing docs. But I would also just throw a little hint out there from my perspective. You've talked about personnel as it relates to charter, and if I remember correctly, your name, so to speak, starts with bylaw. It might be worth looking into the personnel bylaws as well, because as our retired town clerk, and I know, and I'm sure others do, but town clerks are keenly interested and aware of how general bylaws, zoning bylaws, and charter changes get adopted, and that is to say, with some approval of the Attorney General. Personnel bylaws do not. And so I know that my predecessors and I rely heavily on the personnel bylaws that are in place as well. So it's an excellent question to start, and I appreciate where you're coming from. I told everybody the calendar means we start everything early, and that includes the arguing.
Okay.
Because it's all for the greater good, truly, you know, all joking aside. But I want everyone to remember that when we talk governance, it's not just general bylaws and charter, there's also personnel bylaws that impact upon this. And I think it's a great question to bring up. I will certainly do anything on behalf of the board as to how they consider these matters, but any information I can provide other than my opinions, I'd be more than happy to do so. But I think as we talk about personnel, I would encourage everybody to be mindful that we have certainly elements within the charter where you talk about a whole chapter that gets to administrative organization. You have elements within the administrator's chapter, so to speak, that deal with that. But we should also be mindful of that personnel bylaw book, because I think it's should also be an adjunct to the
I
discussion.
asked about that last year, personnel bylaw. I mean, do we have?
I don't know that I've seen a personnel
I
bylaw.
remember this
Well,
came,
Could we have some copies of that?
Absolutely.
I asked
Personnel
for it last
bylaw,
year.
if I may, back in the day, I think we were both clerks when there was still there were bylaws, that's how the Attorney General considered them. So any changes to personnel bylaws would have to go through town meeting,
right.
because it's a legislative act, and would have to go to the Attorney General. And then in the late 90s, early 2000s, they revisited, I believe it's Chapter 41, Section 103N, which gets to municipal personnel. And the Attorney General ruled that personnel bylaws are not the same class of bylaws as general and zoning, so they no longer had to go to the Attorney General for approval.
Right.
Now, it's a local decision, I guess is the way I would say it, what happens to personnel bylaws locally. And I would defer to others, because whatever is happening with our personnel bylaws was in place long before I began.
Are the personnel bylaws on the website? I've never seen them there.
I went looking
So
for it.
we would need copies of those for our
So
committee.
I can provide them first to start. I will tell you that Assistant Town Administrator Megan Eldridge is my primary resource on personnel bylaws, and we did recently update classification and compensation tables to match the actions of town meeting. So I'll make sure that we have the most up-to-date, as we understand it, personnel bylaws, and we can distribute that.
That would be a
That would
big
be
help to
hugely
us.
helpful.
Last year, we,
Hugely helpful.
I know that,
I'm itching for a good fight and a discussion. I wanna make sure everybody has the same information.
Noreen,
Can I respond to a couple of things that Joe said?
you may.
But I don't wanna cut you off anymore.
no, go ahead.
Okay. So first you used the word argument, Joe, and now you've gone to the word fight, you know, so I want to explain that my whole point in doing this, you know, because I thought about it and I said, you know, that's gonna be meetings and work and, you know, maybe we'll just let it go, we'll never hire anybody again, or new positions, but, you know, that won't work. But what I wanna do is take the argument and the fight out of this issue. This is simply a procedure. This is a process. What happened last year, last spring, I thought was, ugly might be too strong a word, but it was close to it. You know, the question about process got turned into a question about the job, the cultural director in this case. And so I want to have a process where people understand whether you're talking about dog catcher or librarian or this or that, that's the process, we all understand it, so that if somebody is questioning something, they don't all of a sudden get, you know, accused of being against the content of it,
Right.
you know, and that was partly what happened last year, and I found it distasteful, you know, so that's why, you know, I'm sorry I went that far, but that's my reason for coming here, is not to have an argument,
Right.
not to have a fight, so that it's a procedure, a process, it goes for everybody, hard times and everything. And I will say, Joe, that a few times I heard you say that whatever process this is, it only kicks in when it's a position without a job description. Or in your union, correct me, this is not my field. You said,
When you say I said, you mean tonight or in past?
oh, no, in
Sure.
the spring,
Yep.
yeah. And you said this discussion only applies to brand newly created jobs. And I would like to dispel that right away, because I don't believe if we have 60 policemen and you hire 20, that you can say, you know, the point is, this one sentence that's in here was meant to mean all additional people. They did not have to be people with a new job description.
Sure, would you like me to respond?
Well, or, yeah.
And it's your meeting, so it'll be through you,
Yeah,
Madam
that's what I
Chair.
mean.
Go
It's
right
up to-
ahead.
And first, I want to go back to what Noreen said. Any comments that I made to arguing and fighting were meant to be
Okay.
light in the summertime. Because I too was central to all that was going on.
Yeah.
And I don't enjoy things that make me sweat outside of a gym. So what I want to first put out there as a thought piece, for lack of a better phrase, is, and I keep going back to our retired town clerk, because she and I have the longest connection in this town. I've known Anita long before I knew there was a Harwich. And so I think she can probably speak to this in any way that she wants, but I am always, me, Joe Powers, as person, as father, as voter, as whatever title I can throw, I am always concerned as a student and practitioner of government about process. You know, when I tell people that what I am at heart as a parliamentarian, when people groan, I'd say, oh, you know what that is. Because parliamentary is everything we're talking about. And so, for me, I'll put it out there because I know this group knows it, but you have a broader audience. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the attorney party. I'm not a lawyer. I am not trained in law as a Juris Doctorate. Rather, I'm somebody that has worked on parliamentary procedure and law in that venue. And what I mean by that is, when I was asked last year by the board or others, what did that charter statement mean? Whatever I stated was going to be my belief, my opinion, and what I thought to be accurate. And so what I said to the board and others is, every one of it's a simple sentence that does not help. It requires further elucidation and illumination. It needs more bones to it. What is meant by new? And my response was, I conceive of something new that does not presently exist. Meaning, if it's talking, because I hadn't heard others in the executive branch, and that's a key that I want to come back to in a moment, and the executive branch describe it in that manner, that new, excuse me, in that utterance meant additional. I was told that new meant not previously existing. And so that's a word and an implication that can be debated until the end of time. For me, what I'm trying to say is, right, wrong, or indifferently, I appear before you tonight and in every instance as an agent of the executive branch. I used to be a strong agent of the legislative branch in another community. I have my preferences, but that's for another day. But that is to say that governance is the ongoing struggle, disagreement, and discussion of the executive branch versus the legislative branch. And at the local government, we miss that key third entity, judiciary. Who is it that's going to say, wait a second, executive interpretation is wrong, legislative interpretation is right, and we so rule it. So every time I approach a question or a matter, in my belief, and my core belief, and my ethics, it must be as an agent of the executive branch, specifically the Board of Selectmen. And so, what do I think it is? I think this says that if we don't have a position that already exists in some form, format, or other, then it must go through this process. That is absolutely ripe for argument, disputation, correction, or anything else that anyone else can give. But oftentimes I'm asked to weigh in on something, as I am tonight, and to say, what do you think? And what I always want to say is, I think you should get a lawyer. Now, having said that, I want to put it right out there, because there's at least one person in this room that has served on a Board of Selectmen in the past.
That would be.
Oh, sorry, there's two, but I was in a different town.
Oh,
Legal counsel is the purview of the executive branch. So right there, there's a disconnect, because only the Board of Selectmen can assign and work with counsel. So I will say that I love all of this, because this is the essence of government, and there's nothing better than local government. Having said that, these are not easy issues with a lot of distance between positions. And when I say positions, I mean philosophical.
bouncing off just a little bit of that dissertation. It sounds like we need some sort of maybe quasi-judicial arbitration,
Yeah.
deciding what the charter means and what it doesn't mean, possibly committee going down the road.
So that smile for me is a recognition of, I would use the line, I think this is where I came in, meaning when I first came to this town and served on this committee, you were discussing that very matter.
Right.
So for me, again, right now, acting in the role of agent of the executive branch, I would say that the judicial oversight is the Attorney General, is why your local charter goes to the AG's office with the question of, does this run afoul of anything? Now, Anita and I can tell you that charter, they simply look at it and say, there's nothing illegal, keep moving. You know, go to the next step, which is the town referendum. They spend more time when they come to general bylaws saying, yeah, this bylaw does not run up against state law, but it runs in conflict with another one of your town bylaws. But the matter of interpretation is always left and still open to the local parties.
Right.
I don't know how you overcome that part of it.
Well, there are ways to overcome it. It's just a question of whether we could get there.
I would agree with that point.
Could I add? With all that said, though, isn't it as important, if not more important, not to figure out what that line said or the previous line said, but to figure out what we want right now here in 2022 and then figure out how to get there? Rather than spend an awful lot of time on research about what they did, and, you know, we
Yeah.
have examples that it's been done different ways.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
whether they were bylaws or this, there are examples. So I'm just wondering if it's I mean, I'm assuming everybody wants it in an article, that may not be true.
Well, I think the correction of it, the elaboration on the
Right.
point is a fairly easy fix. It
Yeah.
wouldn't take more than 2 or 3 sentences to get to that. And it might well go in the charter or a bylaw. I'd rather see it in the charter because I'd like to see it hard to change.
Right.
But I would also like to think that any group of leaders in town would want to do everything they could to be transparent, regardless of how it's interpreted. And there is nothing that would stop them from doing that if they wanted to. Anita, you were going to weigh in back a ways. Or
Yeah, I
you
still
lose your
have.
thought?
No, I did not.
Well, go
I did
ahead.
not lose my thought.
Go.
Several years ago, there was a question about maybe putting the personnel bylaw in the code. And it
Publishing within the code?
publishing within the code. And it got dropped. And I don't know why it got dropped, but it got dropped. So it's something that perhaps, maybe something that could be thought about is putting that in the code, so that way everyone would be aware of what the personnel bylaw is for the town. Just like as you said before, you have the bylaws, you have the zoning bylaws, you have the charter, and then you'd have the personnel bylaw. So people then, transparency, they'd understand. Is that far-fetched?
Through you, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
Not in the least, and where's the camera? In response to, is that far-fetched? In fact,
Yes.
I've had conversations with our new clerk, and we've talked about codification and everything else.
Mhm.
As town administrator, who's the administrator of the personnel bylaws, I would urge for that to happen.
Okay.
Because it is our code book, and as you and I know in the inside baseball, the code book should be any combination of charter, bylaw, and then even further on, if necessary, regulation and policy that we all want to rely upon. It's the good book. And the good book should have all of that material in it. I want to make one more point if I could, and it's not, so if I could,
You can.
thank you. And it's not a retort to what Noreen was saying, but rather I just want to put out there, for me, when you had talked about, the town should want to do this, and we use town as the general, for sure. I look at you as a representative of the legislative branch in this instance, insofar as, for no other reason that you are a voter, and you can put an article forward. So that makes you a legislator, if you will. And you folks have somewhat of that legislative and quasi-judicial, where you can weigh in on it. But I want to emphasize, and I want to be careful about this, because I had what I consider to be a great review by the Board of Selectmen. But I want to emphasize that I am not the board, and the board knows I've constantly said, nor do I want to be the 6th Beatle or the 6th Selectman, and I shouldn't.
4 Beatles. You said the 6th Beatle.
So five selectmen, yeah, thank you, I could do that better, but thank you, you got the meaning, thank you very much. Meaning, that's not my role. So I think this is a great start to a conversation. I think what needs to happen next is, that you engage the executive branch. And I would urge the executive branch not to delegate it, because it's bigger than the town administrator.
What do you mean by delegated?
Not have me respond to you folks on questions like that. Rather, maybe it is a joint meeting. Again, I don't mean to add more work to my boss's plate, but for me, again, as a purist, as a parliamentarian, whenever you're talking about something so critical as your governance, we're not just talking anything, we're talking our rules. We're talking how we operate, we're talking about our good book. It should be the leaders of the legislative branch, executive branch, in concert with any voter, any citizen legislator. I'll always be present for those discussions because I love it, but the executive branch should be engaged in that. And I don't say that as a criticism of the executive branch, I try to offer that as an invitation from you folks to the executive branch.
Just as a question, I lost track of this along the way. Do we have a personnel board or committee, or? We used to have
Not
one,
We
anymore.
used
right?
to have a
No.
personnel board.
No,
That doesn't exist anymore.
No.
And how did that happen? I mean, what,
It dissolved and went into the town administrator at that point in time. I don't
Oh,
remember
okay.
what year it was, but the personnel board dissolved and the
Uh-huh.
responsibilities went to the town
okay,
administrator.
all right. I mean, because I do remember there being a personnel board, you
Right.
know, years
See,
ago when I
amongst
worked
the
in
three of us,
town.
we have a lot of history.
Okay, so if we are going to get together on the 11th, maybe at that point, we can talk about what the selectmen are looking to do as
You
far
said
as
11th,
their
you mean
She meant
August
the
9th?
ninth.
9th,
Thank
rather. What the selectmen are interested in doing for the fall town meeting. And maybe we can narrow down a range of topics that we could talk to the selectmen about, a letter to the selectmen requesting maybe after the fall town meeting, a joint meeting,
Yeah,
that we could go through some of these things that we've talked about all spring and summer. I think that would be good.
the clarification
Is that what you're
certainly
looking
needs to
for,
be
Joe?
there.
That's what you're looking for.
Hearing that, I would keep an eye on your meetings, and, you know, I think that sounds great. And I would defer from, you know, writing anything directly to, and starting what could be a battle, directly with the Board of Selectmen.
Well, it still remains the selectmen's warrant, and if they
Right.
don't like what we put forward, then it doesn't get on the warrant unless a citizen decides to take up the cause.
I know, yeah.
Simple.
During out the years of, I'm going to be philosophical, I think, here. You have a lot of years of history here, a lot of years of remembering when, but we also have a new body of people that are here now. And I think what we need to do is somehow come together
Right.
and try to figure out how we can make things better for the new that are here, not just the old that were. So, thank you very much for bringing that forward.
Yeah,
And
really.
I think maybe we can get something done with this, which will be
Yeah,
good.
that-
That way we'll make it clear.
Right.
So there's
Yeah,
no
the
question from this
clarification,
point.
Yeah,
And I think it's
absolutely.
nice to discuss it when there isn't an individual or a vacant position.
Well, you're
Correct.
not up against
Right,
that.
that's
Not up
right.
against
the
Right.
wall.
Your process here,
Right.
Right.
and that's what I.
Exactly.
Well, hopefully, we
Right.
can get enough ahead of some of these things so that we all know where we're going before we have to get there.
Yeah.
Could be done so early with everything, it can take a
Anyhow.
while.
Doreen, you are welcome to join us anytime, and I hope you will, because it's a good conversation. Ditto, Joe, it's really helpful to have you,
It really
it
is.
really is. Yeah, it gets us a lot further down the road than sitting here in
Yeah,
a vacuum. So,
definitely.
anything else, anybody? You all set?
I'm good.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, ladies, thank you, Joe.